Yes, you are. Thank you very much.
speakers all sit up, I would kindly like to remind you the safety instruction, which is that we recommend you to wear your mask when you don't speak. So we are in the session that will address. You are in the session that will address new, future, and inclusive mobility patterns. And we are here with physically representative for two projects that have worked on gender issues, but we will also have a video message from a project that has worked on new mobility patterns. So we will be 4 speakers in all, and we hope that we will make this very interesting and animate in order to keep you interested and motivated until 6:30 when we will conclude this first day of conference. My name is Anka Pashka. I am project officer in CINEA, which is the agency that manage in part of our portfolio the transport research projects. And in what concerns me, part of my work is to take care of the research projects dealing with socioeconomic aspects of the research in transport. In this parallel session, we will listen to the results presentation of 3 projects from the area of socioeconomic aspects of transport research. Like you all know, social sciences and humanities were integrated in the Horizon 2020 transport work program at several layers. They are embedded first as an essential component of several topics and research components. And they are also present as distinct topics of socioeconomic relevance in a distinct part of the work program. We discussed during the day of how pertinent the social sciences and humanities are or not in some of the very technological aspects of the transport research. So we're happy to see you here when we will present you some main social sciences and humanity-driven projects. The 3 projects that we will hear about in this session are examining issues such as better women participation in the transport systems, be it as users or employees, and also the consideration of a future being shaped by changes in lifestyle, environmental and climate concerns, generating the emergence of new values in order to better understand the mobility of the future. This is in line with the sustainable and smart mobility strategy adopted by the European Commission. Like you all know, the strategy is a roadmap guiding the sector toward the objectives of the European Green Deal. We have heard earlier this morning, and we all know that we are now in a very serious crisis generated by the situation in Ukraine. And this should also remind us how important it is to keep to the objectives of reduction of the green gas emissions in transport that we are expecting by 2050 with a 90% reduction. This comes from reducing the sector's dependence on fossil fuels, but also by encouraging the active travel means, by reducing the pressure on time and speed in our mobility patterns, for example. So this being said, I will give the floor without waiting to Maria Chiara, who is a lecturer at the Technological University of Dublin in the College of Environmental Health. She has done more than 70 publications on human factors, operational risk assessment, and safety management in science. Maria Chiara, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm definitely in the percentile of the population that needs to lower the microphone because I'm shorter than the average. So I'm actually starting this presentation by wondering what we have of value to offer to this audience. So I'll try to see, if you can interact with me and give me some feedback I'll give you some more details because my slides were revised by our communication officer, and every sign of formulas or actual regression models, etc., were cleared of them as considered to be, let's say, not great for communicating the concept. But the reality of this is, in this project, social scientists and data scientists and structural engineer worked alongside each other, not without conflicts, but trying to achieve the scope of this project, which was getting actionable knowledge for addressing gender-specific needs, but also identifying where those things are relevant, in what aspects of the transport systems was this relevant. So the goal was turning big and small data from different sources into actionable knowledge, and you'll only get a very small sample of the data that we collected. The good news is all the data, we put it on Zenodo, and it's actually on an open access basis. So you can actually go on our website and be able to get it if you wanted to use it for your own modeling. They might differ from ours. The project was funded more than 3 years ago, and thanks to the societal challenge, Smart, Green and Integrated Transport call, the demographic change and participation of women in transport was the area. We have 14 partners across 7 European countries, and that enabled us to do a pilot study, because we collected data from 3 countries, mostly. Well, let's say. So we had a case study from Spain in Barcelona, a case study from Warsaw, and a case study from Ireland and UK. So we don't claim that we know the situation for Europe. We claim that we've done enough to do a pilot that can be repeated and can potentially yield something of relevance to other countries as well. So the idea was the key research question that animated were key factors affecting women travel choices, how relevant these factors are in discriminating between different transport modalities or in judging the quality of what service is being offered nowadays. How different job characteristics and contextual factors in transport sectors affect gender balance, because we know we still have a gap, and the key factors influencing career choices. Okay. We had 4 case studies, concretely. So we looked at railway and public multimodal transport, so the women as users of that transport modality, but not only women, also people with different needs. In fact, we consider people that were users and non-users. People also with disability, we consider gender minority. There are different demographic characteristics that were taken into account. Autonomous vehicle. And now, what was the, if you like, the criteria for acceptance from the population, focusing on women, but not only, as we said. Vehicle bike sharing, and what were the evidence of needs and requirement in that form of modality of transport. And then the employment, women as employed in the same, as I said, 3 use cases that we had. The data that we collected, it's actually, there is a variety of it. We started by collecting structured data around, for instance, when we started doing our survey, it was pre-COVID. So we actually collected the survey face-to-face at multiple locations in different stations and bus stops in those 3 cities. And deciding those stations was a decision that was guided by data analytics. So we decided to take some, like the 10th percentile at the opposite end of the curve in terms of urban fabric indicators, so the population density, proximity to point of interest, the age of the population, and the proximity to other public transport and road infrastructure, the density of those characteristics, so that we could actually get more urban central locations and less like suburban locations, and less where the traffic is less and the characteristics of the needs and the transport is different. In general, we also had an observation protocol. For those stations, we collected a user satisfaction questionnaire on multiple criteria, and the criteria were actually identified by doing a thematic analysis on the literature review and a focus group to characterize what fairness and inclusivity meant in those 4 use cases, customizing those characteristics. So on the basis of this, we defined the user satisfaction questionnaire. We also collected data from, I don't have it, my slide for this was taken out by my communication manager, but we also had the data analysis of the social media feeds in around those stations. And then we also collected a DAD, so Dynamic Augmented Delphi, to help having a sort of a hierarchy of those needs when compared with each other's. And we did, on the basis of these preliminary results where there is a variety of data input, but on the basis of that, we distilled the key characteristics that could be used at high level for a self-evaluation questionnaire, self-evaluation tool or audit that managers or transport operator can use in terms of analyzing their level of fairness. And we'll discuss about this. Okay, so if we step into this, those key findings, where do they come from? In reality, they come from our regression analysis. But in reality, what do they say? What do they say about the things that, the factors that seems most strongly related to user satisfaction? So the first finding that it's important to say is that actually fairness and inclusivity is a key parameters for user satisfaction. And if we want to characterize what fairness and inclusivity means in terms of user satisfaction, we can say safety and security, especially for the female population, is still high up on the agenda. Traveling at night is not the same thing as traveling during the day. And ethnic minority suffer this more than others. People with low income have lower level of satisfaction. People that ever experience discrimination on public transport had lower level of satisfaction across all categories of service provision. Sense of place, it's important. So when we think about safety and security, immediately we think that we want more security guards. Actually, we complemented our survey with interviews and focus group and qualitative data. And the majority of the women we interviewed didn't say they want more security guard. They want a better sense of place, better sense of community. In an area where we're going towards autonomous system, most people actually said that they would have liked to see other people still present and patrolling a station, have a sense of a human being in charge of a place. They don't want more CCTV camera. They do want the certainty or the assurance that if there is a system like text message to call for intervention, that intervention is going to come and that system is going to work. But they do prefer a sense of place, and the sense of place is determined by also the amount of people that are sharing that service with you. And yes, the luminosity, yes, the sense of cleanliness or cleaning of the area, and the sense of how well it's kept. But also, is there a community around that place? Is there a go-to person? So this has a psychological impact, as you can imagine. And reliance on private vehicles is still, so as I said, we interview people that were users because we interviewed them at those stations that we selected with those GIS and other structured data information. However, we went out and then we started interviewing people that were non-users, asking them, why are you not able to use public transport? And you'll find that in rural Ireland, for instance, there is no other choice than to use your private car. If you need to bring your kids to school, you might have a bus. But if you need to bring them to any other mobility of care, you need a car. That's the reality, okay, and what we are facing. So there is a very strong difference between an urban environment and a suburban or rural environment in, nowadays, Europe. Convenience, as I said, convenience is also another problem. Even in mobility of care journey, we observe the majority of the services have this radial structure that connect to the center or place of interest in terms of going to work, travel to work. But mobility of care doesn't follow the same pattern. Mobility of care is in and around your area, potentially. And the connectivity there is much less served. And therefore, the option is not using the public transport. Then there is a reference to mindset. There is a problem of also, we say, education. It's important to, that's something that we didn't cover in the survey and we only discovered from the interview. The importance of growing up, having been empowered by your own parents, on having individual mobility needs taken care of by in an independent way. So if you are 14 years of age, 13 years of age, can I go to school using the bus or using my scooter, using my bike? This has an impact on your travel choices for the rest of your life. And design options, okay, there are other options, but I just wanted to distill with you the things that definitely strike me the most. In terms of the key findings on the case study about autonomous vehicle, women were not, yes. In average, there was a little bit of a slight difference between how keen female versus male users were. We had a small sample because, unfortunately, when we started collecting this in the simulator, it was the middle of COVID, so our sample was limited. We only could collect and disinfect everything in between, and it was kind of challenging enough. However, what we found was that there was some certain things in common. So yes, it's the simulator was for a vehicle that was completely autonomous, so level 5, okay? So there was no interaction from the point of view, no takeover, nothing, level 5. Female were keen on using it for, again, the idea of a mobility of care, the idea of providing choices and flexibility for people that potentially can no longer drive, for people that potentially have different needs that are not served by the normal routes. And they still wanted to have a certain degree of control over, for instance, the speed, the modality, so sport driving versus more safe driving, having control over estimated time of arrival, having some level of communication between the autonomous system and themselves to have a perception of being in control of certain factors. And that, by the way, it was across genders. Bike sharing was an interesting, again, we used the docking station around Paris and we interview people at the docking stations. And of course, okay, bike sharing still is there are some challenges in using bike sharing for people traveling with dependent because it requires certain facilities that are currently not really available, like child seats or other form of transport for, imagine that you just don't have one child, but two, where do you put them? Or the hill terrain or the terrain around the area, how safe is perceived to be in terms of bicycle lane or not, in terms of traffic density, and the role, fear of cycling is still there, and yes, some females seems to be less keen and more afraid of cycling than the counterparts, I being one of them, because I nearly got crushed a couple of times. However, I must say, in terms of the research that we found, was that the weather cycle-friendly infrastructure, the potentially having safety and security provision, and the potential availability of facilities for traveling with dependent was something that was in common also with the male. It wasn't just a female needs, it was a needs shared again across different people with different characteristics. The women as employees in transport was the most diverse, while the other three had something in common because they were user of a transport modality. Here we're talking about women as employees in transport. And the diversity of experience is, as you can imagine, significant because depending on the job role, what we collected as data set changed significantly. So the perception of managerial level, the perception of frontline workers, the perception of drivers and maintenance engineers was very, very varied. Job segregation is still very much a reality. There are very few maintenance technicians that are female in rail. There are very few female drivers in rail. So it's still a reality. However, we also met at managerial level some exceptionally good programs and talent managers that we were able to interview that are targeting that issue by ensuring a different program at vocational training level and graduate intake level to make sure they have an intake that tries and be as much as possible providing equal opportunities. The problem of the equal opportunities is how many applicants do we get that are able for that job and have that type of characteristics that are also in the different gender. And the good news is that the majority of the female we interview, they don't want to be there to fulfill a quota. They don't want necessarily the quota to be a KPI that will be used for justifying the fact that they got the job or the position because they happen to be in the right, let's say, in the right categories, in the right demographic categories. That's not what they want. What they want is training, preparation, mentoring support, and good job role models that empower them to fulfill their skill set so that they apply for a job when they feel confident and competent for that job. That is, without fail, the majority of our thematic analysis seems to make this theme as the prevailing one. So the fulfillment of good reinforcement on the side of training and reinforcement on the side of self-confidence in being competent for that type of position. So, however, in terms of education, yes, there is a gap to be addressed because we need more women in STEM that they can apply for maintenance technician position if so they wish. Okay, so this is a table that actually summarizes our ANOVA analysis. So what are the characteristics? What are the profiles, the demographic characteristics of women that, for instance, seems to be more correlated with certain factors? So women who have felt discriminated give a high priority to the personal space and the layout of the seating inside transport. That's an example of visibility of the surrounding area seems to be a characteristic that seems to be prevailing for women living in rural areas and women traveling with dependents, especially children and elderly. Similarly, we found, the profile of women that seems to be highlighting issues or they're less satisfied with certain characteristics employed in rail. And you'll find things like, I want to read one of them for you. So I require working times that make it possible to accommodate work and family commitments. Funny enough, people female without children were a lot less satisfied with this aspect. And that is because there was a fear factor. Because we actually asked in the interview, because we couldn't really understand this, we were expecting women with caring responsibility to be less satisfied than the others. No. Women with no children, without caring responsibility, seems to highlight this as an issue. Why? Because there was a fear factor. And actually, the fear factor is higher in this type of category. So again, low income, low level of education. There is a stronger fear factor on the fact that they are prevention of dismissal of demotion during and after maternity period. Overall satisfaction with the socioeconomic needs and how they are supported in the workplace. And also overall training development needs. So we seem to be doing a lot better in addressing the training needs at managerial level. The lower it gets, the less good we are. we still have some of the thematic. These are some sentences that were used from the interview, and they were analyzed in the thematic analysis. So, yeah. So, for instance, this is an example. So, it's trying to treat each group equally, but reflecting the fact that women have slightly different challenges. They may have elderly care, having babies, and coming back again. So, this is a female managing director. From a female driver, you say, I'm the only woman in the training department. I'm the only woman in the policy team. I look at the next rung of potential management, and I don't know any women in those positions in the company that can take up those roles. So there are still lingering issues. But as I said, there is a lot of good stuff being done that we have seen first-handedly. As I said, Irish Rail got the Talent Management Award this year for the simple reason that in their incoming program, so the graduate program and the vocational training program, they explicitly had this target of highlighting and targeting also kids in secondary school to make it possible for them. You see it, you can be it. That was their logo. So to make it possible for them to envisage themselves as fantastic maintenance technicians. And the best way to do it was to send those women that we have met who have, larger than life, some of them characters, that are really able to inspire and make it possible for them to envisage a type of different career that they would normally not see out there. I'm going to skip on the recommendations because what I wanted to leave you with is the fact that out of the pilot study that we have done, by the way, out of the pilot study that we have done, we developed a potential model that is called the Fairness Maturity Model. And the way it works is, okay, so if you really want to be serious about fairness, it becomes something that you need to address. And to address it, like Peter Drucker used to say, what gets measured gets done. Unless it becomes something that you can assess, you really cannot say that you're targeting or improving or where you're at in respect to it. So to evaluate your inclusiveness and fairness, it's possible to have observable variable. And we saw this because in Warsaw, the Transport Authority went out and did the audit of their own space in relation to accessibility, in relation to capacity to meet required needs, punctuality, ability to travel to points, and safety and security. And they were able to establish some ground truths about how good or bad their service provision was. Alongside that, you can use a perception and satisfaction survey, like we did, and they correlate well, guess what, with the observation variables and the structural data. And last but not least, we distilled the main characteristics to make it possible to have a self-audit, quick and dirty if you like, but nevertheless effective at managerial level, to say, okay, if those are the distilled categories, how good are we? Even in a Likert scale fashion, to at least put it on the map. And because this is a successful model in other domains like safety culture and safety management or quality management, we think it can be customized and applied also in the context of fairness and inclusivity, and use as benchmarking across multiple organizations within the same sector, within the same type of mobility type. However, it's just simple enough that could be, and it's in relation to a percentage of criteria that are above a certain threshold. We developed this into a toolkit that has the 4 case studies that we have, so in terms of employability, metro railway system user, autonomous vehicle, and vehicle sharing services. And the assessment is exactly that type of simplified questionnaire that gives you an idea about how good you're doing. I'll leave you with just a website, and the fact that they deleted also that slide for me. My favorite slide in my presentation that was deleted by my is the Bayesian Network. There is a Bayesian Network underpinning our model of how satisfaction is influenced by different factors and different fairness characteristics. And that model can change if we collect more data. And we can learn. It's an AI, human-centric AI algorithm, because Bayesian Networks is a graphical tool that can show you the dependence, how certain probability affect a variable, which is the satisfaction of our users. So for me, it's something that we can work on and others can use and model themselves using our own data set and others to, if they're interested, to identify what really matters. That's it. Sorry for this.
Thank you very much, Maria Chiara. It shows indeed how complex it is to summarize all the results of your long and very intensive work. I will now give the floor without waiting to our next speaker, who is Professor Andre Woodcock from the Coventry University. Andre has been an active partner in many EU and national projects, so you have probably had the occasion of hearing or seeing her in the past. And she's very engaged for a more inclusive engagement of end users in the design of a variety of transport and non-transport related services. Okay. Andre, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you everybody for allowing our project to present this afternoon. I'm doing a joint presentation. I was PI of Tingo, and Hilda was the scientific lead on it, and we'll be trying to do an equal presentation on this. So I'm from Coventry University, and Hilda is from Denmark. Right. I took this off the website, advertising this particular conference. Look at it. It doesn't represent you, does it? So thank you for that. Who's missing? Come on, shout out. Who's missing from this? Women. People with... There are a couple, aren't there? I counted around 10% of women in the main thing. People with disability. People from ethnic minority groups. They're missing. What does this mean? This means that we're not using the whole talent pool of the EU. This means, as we saw this afternoon, that what the technology that is being developed isn't being developed for a lot of people. And you can't just say 163 million, or however it was, doesn't count. Actually, they do count. And maybe if they were included in this group, they'd start counting now and their voices would be heard. What Tingo is about is trying to redress this balance. I have a small video here so you don't have to listen to me.
The transport industry in the EU is a male-dominated sector with women representing a minority of only 29.5% of the workforce. Apart from the gender barriers to access the transport labour market, women employed in the transport sector are faced with occupational segregation, harassment at work, or problematic work-life balance due to inflexible work organisation. Moreover, the use of public transport by women and other vulnerable groups can often be a source of danger or of gender-based violence that undermine the accessibility of the mobility sector in general. Technological and organisational innovations have highlighted the concept of smart mobility as the key response to the big environmental and societal challenges that the transport sector is facing. The Tingo project approached the concept of smart mobility by highlighting the need to include equality and diversity in its development, and revealed how inequalities in the transport sector are created. In this context, Tingo developed tools for meeting gender-specific requirements of certain user groups and for supporting gender-balanced employment. A pan-European observatory for gender-smart transport innovation and an open innovation platform as the nexus for the collection and analysis of gender mobility data and statistics for the dissemination of gender mainstreaming tools and innovative practices. Recommendations and good practices of gender and diversity action plans in the transport sector. 10 regional hubs researching specific issues on gender and diversity smart mobility, developing concrete solutions together with stakeholders, testing them with users and disseminating the results.
Okay, so that was a quick overview of the project, faster than I could have done it. We're funded under the same scheme as the Diamond Project, so we're sister projects. We had a 36-month project from December 2018 to last November, and here you can see my project team in one of the few occasions that we actually met. Yeah, we're all happy there, weren't we? And much thinner probably by then. So in terms of who we were, you can see that we spread from the United Kingdom over to the Baltic states, from Sweden and Denmark down to Italy. We were comprised of SMEs, local authorities, universities, and transport organisations as well. Our overall objective was to create a framework and mechanism for a sustainable game change in European transport through a transformative strategy of gender and diversity-sensitive smart mobility. So what I need you to take from this is we're after creating a paradigm shift. We're looking at smart mobility as as an upcoming area. And in terms of transport, we don't want smart mobility to replicate all the problems of the past. We want to make it more inclusive. And we're going to do this by implementing gender mainstreaming. For those of you who haven't heard about this, it's a range of tools to identify imbalances and inequalities where gender has been invisible or regarded as not important. And we had a hard sell sometimes on this. We went into some transport organisations and there was a whole set of men in the room and they said, we don't have a gender problem. So we weren't totally shocked by that, but we had to do a hard sell and say, well, maybe it could be a little bit different here. And there was a lot of trading tit for tat on that. And we also wanted to explore how intersectionality influences travel and transportation needs in much the same way as Chiara's been presenting further on. These aren't particularly smart objectives, but they're at the next level. We wanted to assess specific transport requirements of a diverse set of women. We wanted to evaluate employment and education within the smart mobility sector and provide a set of recommendations that would remove the barriers to employment and education for women and those from diverse groups. We also wanted to remove the barriers to mobility of various groups as well. We wanted to create opportunities for the development of gender-sensitive smart mobility products and services. So you're not just designing for the early adopter. Those e-bikes aren't just for commuting men, young men and teenagers. We were looking at spotlighting female entrepreneurship as a new and emerging field of transport-related employment and innovation. And we did do surveys with female entrepreneurs and the real successful women. We did this through developing 10 national hubs to explore specific areas of mobility. We provided an interrogatable and easily accessible mobility data repository and survey engine for gender smart mobility data and a one-stop observatory. So I'm sure Hilda might say something else about this, but we're into transforming practice. And the way we want to do this is through trying to implement or persuade organisations to implement gender and diversity action plans. We've taken the old gender action plans and we've renewed it. We're looking now at wider issues of diversity and intersectionality. And in much the same way as Chiara was saying, having a gender action plan, something you can implement and measure within an organisation, helps you widen your employment base. It's going so well. So those of you who are unfamiliar with intersectionality, this is a basic model of intersectionality. So if you look at mobility, it can be influenced by ethnicity, culture, age, ableness, religion, gender, sexuality, and probably a whole host of other factors that we've not looked at. These, in turn, are influenced by housing, economic activity, caring responsibilities, income, education, and class. And mobility sits in the middle of this. If you're not providing mobility for everybody, then you're running into a cycle of transport poverty, and especially gender transport poverty, where people get into a downward cycle because they can't access jobs, they can't access education because the transport isn't there for them. And so in terms of our key performance indicators, we developed EASY criteria as a composite performance indicator where we could measure effectiveness, inclusivity, sustainability, affordability, and attractiveness. The overview of our activities, we undertook research. First of all, we designed and implemented gender and diversity action plans and implemented these within transport organisations. We conducted a gender disaggregated mobility survey as best we could in 10 countries across Europe, but yeah, COVID wrecked our plans on that and we had to do it all online. We evaluated gender bias in STEM provision, in female progression to transport research, And we also looked at the analysis of visual representations of smart mobility. Also, I come from an arts and humanities background, so I was interested in adding the use of design provocations, design tools, and design thinking to bring insight, detail, and empathy into the equation here when you're designing smart mobility futures. In terms of capacity building, we created 10 national hubs acting as living labs, 8 training modules, and a course in citizen science to build up capacity amongst different groups. We created 11 policy briefs, created new resources and methods for the EU transport community, which will be our legacy to the community, and developed KPIs for smart mobility based on intersectionality. How did we do this? We did this through an observatory and 10 national hubs in Romania, Baltic States, France, Sweden, and Denmark, Germany, UK, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece. I've said that before, that's why I could run it off. These were set up as national hubs. They were research centres, but we also wanted them to act as living labs, so they could become beacons of engagement, activity, and know-how. And they fed the tools that we developed as a project through to the local business transport ecosystem. They also engaged in citizen science and citizen engagement, so not just engaging with the transport organisations, but really with the people. And this is where we really suffered because of COVID, because we wanted to actually have a physical presence in our cities and grab people off the street. We had to move this online, so our sampling was biased because a lot of people, they really weren't interested in talking about transport if they were too busy trying to survive, and a lot of organisations became protected. But we did try, and we'll show you the work we did. Our national hubs also did the data collection for us, so the mobility surveys, they did STEM surveys as well. The Tingo Observatory is a web-based observatory, which includes our data repository, hub pages, resources, an open innovation platform, and links to other material. As I said, we have 10 hubs. Each of these had a theme that was important to them. It might be cycling for Denmark and Sweden, looking at private vehicles, future vehicles, shared vehicles and taxis, but they also had an overall theme as well, a topic they are interested in, which could be entrepreneurship, safety and security, discourse of media analysis, policy and planning. So we hoped by having a hub and spoke type of project, we could cover quite a range of things and get a very good picture of what was going on across Europe. I'm only going to say some of the results and guidelines. Please get in contact with us. We do have a lot of information here, as Chiara had as well from hers. So looking at improving women's mobility through our survey, women did value surveillance and security over multimodality more than men. A key finding here was only 30% of our sample were actually satisfied with current public transport provision. Only 30%. That means something's gone very wrong here. And once harassed, it's hard to restore trust. Only 19% of our sample said that they'd been harassed. We think that's very much underreported because people are afraid. They're afraid of police, they're afraid of going to the public operator, and they're also afraid that their incident will be trivialised. We looked at recommendations for improving public transport infrastructure, security and surveillance, and public transport services. And none of this is rocket science. We've been saying the same things for 30 years. What's missing is the will to do something about it. And that's why we need to put in place gender and diversity action plans and look at who's in charge of the transport situation. In terms of gender differences for AVs, I'm just going to concentrate on the woman's side. So they're concerned about sharing location and the phone number in an automated vehicle. They might not want to use one because they could see a technology even fail. But also, and importantly, based on what we heard earlier on, they don't think it will solve problems, the real problems that they have to face with. We looked at visual representation, so we scraped images off the internet and other sources. As we know, images are pervasive and they're persuasive, and they're selling us something. So you need to look at who creates those, and why are they creating them, and one reason could be to maintain the status quo. And all of the images that we looked at, or most of them, portrayed a benign mobility system that all users can access seamlessly and on demand. They're selling the technology dream. They promote cars as isolated devices in certain and specific contexts. Cars appear more individual, they can be personalized, they're technology aware, they can do this, they can do that, they're bigger and space consuming, and they're sitting in idealized cities and landscapes. But who's being omitted from these utopian scripts? It's the users of public and shared transport, and it's the same vulnerable groups aren't being featured in these images. We looked at barriers to employment in the transport sector, and we're seeing the same things time and time again. And, you know, we're in 2022, and look at it. We're getting misogynistic attitudes, we're getting sceptical and depreciative attitudes, we're getting gender discrimination in hiring, gender pay gaps, internal bureaucracies that make it hard to get leave, and a prevailing male working environment, which is intimidating. And women also had the dual burden of having to go to work and most often do most of the housework as well. And it's maintaining that life balance that's a problem for them. Quickly looking at barriers in research and development, we're all really privileged here, the women. We've all worked really hard to get where we are because we found 36 barriers that women face if they're to be successful in a research and development background. Most of this comes from the research and development doesn't operate in a background. In a vacuum even. It sits within a higher educational institute and it adopts some of those principles as well. So again, we've got many of the things that we saw in wider employment, harassment, misogyny, depreciating women's values, looking at male-based clubs as well. There's very much a Matilda effect where women's research is not regarded as highly as men. We don't have powerful networks. Our career footprints are reduced. So from all that, we developed a set of recommendations and guidelines, and they can be used along with the gender and diversity action plans to create a gender-smart transport system, workplace, HEI sector and research environment as well. It's the same sort of gender and diversity action plan that would work for all these. Moving quickly on to capacity building, dissemination, communication, we developed the Tingo Observatory as a one-stop shop where all our efforts are online and freely available to everybody. The surveys and the results, our publications, training models. Well, I wonder what a training model is. It's a training module and citizen science course and links to key resources. Additionally, our observatory provided a place for, all the national hubs to actually say something about what they were doing as well. We had sufficient visits by the time the project ended. We've developed an incident reporting tool, which is online, where women can say what harassment problems they've had. And we've provided an open data repository for the collection of sex-desegregated data. We're going to leave this up. Everyone is open to add to this, but it's only going to be on there as long as people are willing to share data. And we have a real problem across the community that people aren't willing to share their data. We developed an open innovation platform where we looked at design. So this was a collaborative space where the hubs could provide us with design ideas. A design team at Coventry created conceptual design provocations to facilitate further discussion and build up empathy about what people's lives were really like, what were the difficulties they had. The design solution might be wrong, but it's a way of opening up discussion, and we had over 50 design concepts. I now turn over to Hilda, who will say something about this. And Hilda will be looking at dissemination, communication, and moving on to impact.
Thank you so much. I just wondered what is left to say here, because I think Andrea has done a great work here. So, and I know that time is also, we are running late here. So in a way, I would like to concentrate on the Tingo Charter here, which I have disseminated some copies of. Because the problem is when you I won't go through all the results again. You have heard a lot about it. I could have I could have elaborated on how is it to be a gender researcher together with people who never thought about gender as anything but their wives, etc., etc. But in order to keep things alive, we at the end of the project set up this charter because, of course, we looked around and what can you do in order to keep yourself and your results and ideas alive. And as you can see here, the idea is that to maintain a focus on the gaps, on the structural inequalities and insufficient planning and services in European transport and mobility. And it's also to maintain these core ideas which was presented by Andrea about the gender and diversity action plans, which is an innovation. I'm really humble here. It's an innovation in the European landscape to have these plans implemented, not only in transport, but all over the place. And then I think our idea of gender smart mobility as consisting of 5 dimensions, as you have heard, transport and mobility as promoting or being affordable, effective, attractive, sustainable, and inclusive. That's also a guideline that we hope can be used and applied more widely. And we have tried it. I mean, we have used the Tingo project as a laboratory for exploring these various dimensions. And if we go into the landscape of indicators, then the European Union and politicians, they love what we call tick box indicators. Women or men, tick box. Is this? Are there any relevant gender dimensions? No, etc. And here we have introduced these indicators as we call more normative or more reflective indicators, meaning that there is often, of course, a yes and no answer, but there can also be paradoxes and contradictions. For example, I made a case study of comparing BMW with Volvo and their promotion of smart cars. And if you ask these questions to these cars, I mean, they are smart for some, but not for others. They are not, we came up with a lot of yes and no questions, and I worked together with younger colleagues who did not see the same problems as I did. So, I mean, there are also all kinds of how you are located as a researcher. A final thing in the Tingo project was also to bring all these ideas and results and findings in closer, what I call proximity to politicians. Andrea never liked this word, proximity to politicians. And how do you do that? I will say that we missed a lot the physical meetings with, such as this occasion, to present our ideas. But after the project finished, we have presented or were invited to the FEM and Transport Committee, where the Tingo project was presented. And we have the pleasure also in Denmark of having a new transport minister who started her career as my employer as a student. So we are having a good conversation. And I mean, that's the whole idea with this charter. And if you look more precisely, turn the paper around, who are we addressing? We are addressing exactly the people who are sitting here today, the European Union and committees. We would like you to set up annual or biannual conferences and seminars, and also to use and apply this idea of gender smart mobility to explore its potentials, and also to introduce GADAP plans in your organization. And then we have a very important point also addressing data collection on transport, because it turns out, and probably many of you know, that it's very unequal across Europe. Denmark, Sweden, and a couple of other countries have very detailed statistics, etc., but many European Union members do not have it. So we will encourage the Eurostat to collect these gender-sensitive numbers and figures, because without numbers, I don't think we can make change happen. And then finally, we would also like to address EIGE, European Institute of Gender Equality, who have done splendid work on family, on labor, on health, etc., etc. We would like them to include transport and mobility in their index, and we have been pressing them for years now, and I really hope that we could make also change happen here. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much to the three speakers for sharing your results, but also your passion and the new concepts you have studied during these two projects. Now on the agenda, you would have maybe seen that we had a third project that was planned to be presented as well. We have a video which we do not have any more the time to see, but I'm 99% sure you will be able to see it online if you're interested. The project is called Rebalance, Future Mobility Values and Culture, and the speaker is Silvia Gaggi, so the video will be made available later on. For the sake of time, because we will have a signature ceremony at 6:30. So for the sake of time, I will directly give the floor to Suzanne Hoadley from Polis. She will take the questions from the room, if there are some.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone, with there's 5 minutes left. I mean, I think you could have actually taken the Q&A round. I mean, I'm not going to try and sum up what we've heard today. I think there's been so much information that's been shared, and as has already been said, a lot of passion. So yeah, I mean, we do have some time for questions, one or two questions. If not, then I would actually share some anecdotes from my side about my own personal experience. I mean, I'm not an expert on inclusion and certainly not on gender. I do have colleagues who are very active in this area, but having worked in the transport domain for 20 years, I can certainly identify with many of the points that have been raised, the findings, and I was going to go through those. But first, over to you. Who would like to ask a question to our speakers, or who has an experience to share?
I would want to ask a question, but maybe I shouldn't.
Please introduce yourself. Yeah.
Yes, so you know me already. I'm Tali Hadjakis. I'm involved in disability research. Obviously, I love the idea that we are addressing gender issues, and we have been addressing gender issues as well, like doing gendered analysis within disability. There are particular considerations about safety and about just the different patterns of how, different patterns of traveling, different reasons for traveling. The fact that you are a carer, even if you are disabled, you are also a carer. So you always have somebody dependent on you, and it's not catered very well. So I'm very glad to see. I didn't have a question as such, but I had a couple of suggestions based on what you said. One, what doesn't measure doesn't get done. So we also have an index on accessibility. And what we would like to propose is a common observatory that is public. It's public out there, and the information is about complaints is visible. So politicians, governments, municipalities transport operators can pledge what they're going to do about X, Y, Z, because that doesn't exist. One of the biggest complaints has been that all the comments go in a black box at the back store of some transport operator and never see the light of day to be addressed. So if you would like to work with us and promote something like that in unison, that would be fantastic. The other thing that I would like to maybe join us to work together is to create a European Design Center for such analysis and such design, because we found out that transport operators don't have the internal expertise or the departments or the capacity or the funding to do this user-centric research, whether it is gender, whether it is inclusivity. So how about creating a structure that can support them to do that, so they don't have any excuses of not doing it anymore?
Yeah, that would be really good, and I would welcome that. We were using design as a way of trying to get people to build up empathy, because we were working with young designers and they only design for people like themselves. And it was trying to use design as a way of opening up the conversation. And we were working with technologists and scientists within the project. They were quite new to design, but they didn't have, you know, you can say the stats all you like, but the stats doesn't tell you anything about lived experience. And that's what we're trying to get at. So that would be really good. Be very interested in doing that. Yeah, thank you.
Samir, gladly, only one question. Instead of sharing a big box of complaints, you can only build on positive stuff. You don't build on negative elements. So the best thing that we can do and we have to offer is building on the positive experience there are so many. Instead of complaining and filling the box of complaints, we have so many good examples. And they are the things that need to be shared louder and clearer, even more than the complaints, because they offer a way forward.
I think we probably need a carrot and a stick. I mean, we are developing accessible journey planners, which doesn't exist. So of course, there's a gap. Let's address it. Let's do something about it. And our index kind of provides actionable. Okay, we have problems for, I don't know, accessing the toilets. That's an issue. Address this issue as something simple, practical, that some transport operator can actually say, that's of priority to the people. Let's kind of drive investment into this area, in this particular city. Not in the abstract, we have a problem with accessibility generally. That's the problem, let's address that, make it specific.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid we're going to have to come to a close now because the next session is started. So thank you very much. But I'd just like to say, I think the idea of a pledge is great. I mean, within Polis, you know, I work for Polis, which is a network of city and regional authorities. You know, our members, you know, we propose lots of pledges to our members, which they sign on road safety, on climate, and on other areas. And I think it would be great to have something on accessibility and widening that to gender as well. I think that could certainly bring about change. And if we, you know, I was involved in an accessibility project in public transport already 15 years ago, and it was very, very, very insightful. And I think there has been progress has been made, but it is painfully slow. But you know, so I think the pledge is great, and gender mainstreaming, I think it's great. You know, these gender action plans. So. Lots of food for thought and actions as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to our speakers. Please join me in thanking them.
Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry we ran out of time.
Well, we can continue the discussion during the drink afterwards.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.